Welcome to the Daily Plunge. We are in Paul's first epistle to the Thessalonians. He says, you know that our visit had results. What results? Hey, you turned from dead-end idols and you saw the word of God come with power and affect your lives. And Paul says, even though we had been previously treated outrageously and suffered in someplace else, that didn't stop us. We kept preaching the gospel in the face of strong opposition. We dared to, through the help of God, the encouragement of God, to preach the gospel. And I want you to think about what opposition is there within us to hear the gospel, and what opposition does the church face in preaching the gospel. Now he goes on to say in verse 3, our gospel appeal comes not out of error, heretical teaching. It doesn't come from impure motives for our own personal gain. It doesn't come through trickery. What is the motivation? And if it's the love of God and the love of God's people, then that's the proper motivation. Now he says, we have been approved by God to preach and trusted with preaching the gospel, which always comes in two words, right? The law and the gospel. You can't preach the gospel without the law. And not everybody is called to preach the gospel. Not everybody has that temperament. All Christians are called to bear the gospel, but not everybody's called to preach it. And that's part of the right reason why he says, we're not trying to please people. We're trying to be obedient and please God. And so that we never used useless flattery. We didn't cover our preaching wasn't a cover for our own greed, but rather God who tests us knows what's in our hearts, what our motivation is in the preaching of the gospel. And that's why he says, we're not looking for praise from people. And I think that's a thing. When you listen to sermons, it's not the pastor's job to make you happy. It's the pastor's job to preach the word of God to you, which again comes both as law and gospel. The law convicts, but the gospel frees and gives us hope. But Paul goes on to say, we didn't just share the gospel, we shared our lives. We shared our very selves with you. How are we sharing our lives as we try to share the gospel with others? He goes on to say, God is our witness, and that we were delighted to share this gospel with you. And he knows that our motivation is holy, and it's righteous, it's right with God, and it's blameless, because our motivation was for your blessing, your gain, not ours. Paul makes that clear throughout this passage in chapter 2. He then goes on to say, he asserts that as with their apostolic authority to preach the gospel, that they're exercising a spiritual fatherhood. That is the role of the pastor, the leader within the church, to be encouraging, to comfort, to urge, even to correct folk, in order to help people to live the life that God calls them to. As it says in this passage, God calls you into his kingdom and his relationship, his covenant. So the pastor encourages, comforts, and urges you. Well, thanks, friends. Have a blessed day.